Hello and welcome to MedCity News' annual Invest Conference. My name is Orudhuti Parmar. I'm the editor-in-chief of MedCity News and usually the host of our in-person live events. But given that the only reality we're allowed to have in these times is virtual, we thought it would be good if we brought some exclusive content from one of our longtime supporters and sponsors, JP Morgan. I wanted to welcome Pamela Aldsworth, Head of VC Coverage and Managing Director at JP Morgan. Pamela will begin with sharing some slides on deals and deal making. And after that, we'll have a Q&A about how startups can survive the challenges facing them at this time. Pamela, take it away.
Thanks, Arundhati. I'm happy to be here. And I've been at JP Morgan for a little more than 6 months. I came from Silicon Valley Bank, and I work with both technology and life science VCs, more technology than life science. So I have to give my partner, Peter Meath, a little credit for some of the data that he's given me into the slides that we're going to use today. So on slide one, I think we all know that life science has always had the mission of changing the world and being innovative and helping human health. And that's even more important today. A couple of years back, we were seeing that life science was really getting a bad name and how much was drugs costing to the public markets and really starting to get scrutinized on what it costs for innovation. And I think today, because of COVID and that the public is starting to see how this industry takes a lot of work, we're starting to see more innovation happen. It's not just contained in COVID either. The consumer sentiment about life science is shifting. Funding environment is evolving though. Pre-COVID valuations were on the rise, partnerships were booming, and startups could access liquidity through VC and public markets. The question now is what is going to happen with private companies and what kind of fundings will they have and how that will change. On slide two, so throughout the 2010s, life science saw a great boom, but 18 and 19 funds have been flushed with capital, and we've seen record highs in investments. We are seeing larger funds investing larger amounts of capital into Series A and B rounds, but we're seeing less companies getting funded. So bigger rounds, less companies. U.S. healthcare startup raised a record of almost $11 billion in 2019, which was $1 billion more than the previous year. We have also seen companies assessing the public markets at earlier stages, with crossover investors being active at very early stages. We used to see crossover investors coming in later into the company's development, more like phase 2, phase 3, and now we're actually seeing them coming in at the platforms. They thought that to get into deals earlier and to get the better valuations, they had to come in earlier. On slide 3, partnerships have become a significant strategy for large pharma and biotech firms. Large pharma realized a long time ago that innovating within big pharma is not as easy as partnering with small companies that can be more innovative and take more risk in developing these drugs. So there's been great partnerships at the very early stages. It's a path to innovation for them, and they can move to license new therapies by partnering with startups. The total deal value for biopharma, platform, medtech, and diagnostic partnerships exceeded $110 billion in 2019. Truly amazing. R&D partnerships for therapeutic platforms and biopharma, for example, totaled $34.5 billion in 2009. In 19, it was 3 times that value. We think as VCs are trying to respond to the shifting economic landscape, partnerships will increase as evidenced in the first 2 quarters of this year. So the companies that are getting funded in VCs are also the ones that are starting to do partnerships. And some of these companies are actually being incubated out of the VC funds with a big pharma company knowing about it and investing at the very, very early stages. So this takes a lot of risk out of VC funding because the VCs kind of already know where the M&A is going to come from and which pharma company is going to buy them if it works out. And so They're happening very, very early on. The VCs are actually putting the management teams together and coming up with the solutions. And so that's a little bit different than what we have seen in the past. The last decade has seen a wave of new technologies such as biologics and gene and cell therapies. These developments were highly coveted by large pharma and biotech firms, which often lacked among their core competencies. Areas such as oncology, rare disease, and the central nervous system will continue to be a focus for long-term pipelines and values. The share of biopharma R&D partnerships signed at the platform stage has grown since 2016. In 2014, 54% of all partnerships were these early stage deals, compared to 19% in phase 2 and phase 3 development. In 2019, 63% of partnerships were inked in the platform stage and 18 were in phase 2 or phase 3. These figures reflect a trend over the past 10 years toward more financing and dollars flowing to preclinical companies. In the recent past, more investors have been willing to fund startups earlier in the development cycle to secure access to better opportunities. Whether there will be a pullback toward the later stage companies, as happened in the last recession, remains to be seen. Looking ahead, COVID-19 have spurred interest in the biotech space by those previously not involved in it. We're seeing a significant recognition of novel innovation across all biotech areas, from a sentiment perspective, and increased desire to deploy capital in the space. While many clinical trials have been paused or delayed, we expect that the coronavirus will have limited impact on new product launches and product sales within biotech. Medical device is a different story than biopharma. We have seen that it is very tough to get funded in medical device because biopharma is more scientific and med device gets more scrutiny. It matters what med device is procedurally driven, and it matters what the doctor wants to focus on. So success is whether a doctor actually uses the core product. It also matters if the device is used for elective surgery. And as we all know, in these COVID times, elective surgery is really taking a hit, such as dental and ophthalmology. And so we really think that med device is going to struggle for the next couple of years. Also in this environment, it'll be harder if the device is used, if the device requires extensive training in person, and also if it's a direct sales model. So as we all know, there's usually reps that go into the hospital and wine and dine these doctors to use their devices, and that's not able to be used right now. So we feel like med device is just gonna have a tough time over the next couple of years. We also, our thoughts about med device is that hospitals are under enormous financial stress, and CapEx and buying patterns will likely shift as a result also. And so another kind of sad story about med device. So slide 6, talking about tools and diagnostics, this may be one of the winners during the COVID crisis. Since we've all seen that testing has been a real problem and we were not ready for this crisis, we now understand how critical it is to have tools and diagnostic products. We think elective procedures will be strained, such as dental and ophthalmology, but that we'll see other diagnostics that will be very important, such as COVID itself. Not mentioned in these slides, but we are seeing a great deal of VC going into digital health, and that is having a huge VC investment boom because people are realizing that you can do a lot of things over the internet. So we're seeing mental health being solved. We're seeing even cardiac health, where doctors are coming in and doing diagnostics before you have to go to a hospital. So we've seen a lot of venture money going into digital health. Also, the interesting thing about digital health is this is where the intersection of tech and life sciences are coming together, and they bring the expertise of both kind of investors. VCs understand software, and the healthcare VCs understand how to manage the hospitals and the insurance companies. So that is a sector that we're seeing really start to take off on both sides of the kind of venture landscape. And we really think that in the next couple of years that healthcare will have a shift from being totally in person to a lot more digital.
That's great, Pamela. Thank you very much for sharing your slides with us. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about how VCs are investing and how you see the landscape altered. So from your perch as the head of VC coverage, how are you seeing the landscape altered in terms of the process of venture investment?
Yeah. So in March, I think everybody went into a total panic and they kind of pulled out their 2008 playbook and said, we have to look within, we have to do major portfolio reviews, see what companies are doing well, which ones are struggling, and decide who are we going to keep as the winners and who are we going to have reserves for, and then who's going to be in trouble and may not survive. So that happened, I would say, for March and April. All the funds stopped investing and kind of hunkered down to see what was happening in their own portfolio and tried to understand how much money would be needed to keep these companies going during this time. As maybe May came along, things did not get as bad as everybody thought they were going to get. And most of their companies were funded for a good period of time. And so I think the VC funds started to calm down and realize that their companies were in better shape. And so then they were starting to feel a little better about looking at new investments.
I understand that you believe that there's likely going to be more liquidity in the marketplace, but isn't it true that much of the money will flow to later stage companies, leaving sort of early stage and growth companies in the lurch? What's your sense?
So my sense is that I think mostly in healthcare and life sciences that there has been a move to go earlier in the development because the risk profile people have actually found out is less. Because if you do this right and you get a company to a stage where it's at the platform where big pharma can take it and then do the trials and spend all the money on that, the return for the VCs and for the entrepreneurs is quite good. And so I think that we're going to still see the same trends where a lot of money is going to go into less deals. And so even if they're earlier stage or their growth, people are becoming more selective. And they're also, as I talked about previously with the reserves, they're also focusing on their existing companies to make sure that they can survive during this time.
Are you seeing VCs getting comfortable with investing over Zoom without meeting company management?
Yeah, that's a really hard one. What we have seen is companies that are in the later stage in the growth stage, they court those companies for quite some time. And so I think more deals are getting done in the later stage because they watch the company and they track it and they probably have a meeting with them quarterly to get an update on things, how things are going. And the deals were more in the works. They take longer to close. So I think we'll see later stage deals get done just because there's kind of a pipeline and they know these people. The earlier stages, what we're seeing is that investors will put a small amount into companies, maybe a couple million if they've just met somebody over Zoom. But this industry is really about relationships and you're together for a very, very long time, mostly in life science, right? This is a 10 to 15 year project. And so I think there is a lot of struggling and we have seen these slowdowns happening and there has not been a lot of new funding activity.
Okay. What other types of funding sources should entrepreneurs be looking at if VCs are clutching onto their purse strings?
I think this is very interesting. As you know, you were commenting before that we do think there's a lot of money in the system, and I do believe that. Unlike any other downturn, VCs are flushed with cash, but so are a lot of other outlets. So family offices have really become a new sector that has wanted to get into innovation and technology. And some of these families, it's very personal for them. They've either had a family member who had a sickness and they want to help fund this sickness, or they're very interested in a different sector. And some of these family offices have more money than the venture capital funds. And so and they are very patient. They care about developing something, not getting a short-term return. So we think family offices are one of those places that we'll see. We believe in partnerships. So I think if you're a company that has a a good product and someone is interested in it, I do think you can get, investment through partnership. And then the third thing I would say, which is a little unconventional, but it happens a lot of times in downturns, is if you have a big customer, you should see if they will help finance you, and maybe either pay upfront for a 2-year contract instead of a 1-year contract, or something like that. And then there's a lot of overseas money too, and it's just in these times you have to look under every rock and figure out how you're going to survive.
Mm-hmm. So you sort of foresaw my last question for you. How can startups best prepare for a deeper recession than many are predicting is about to happen?
Yeah. So first of all, and this is so important, you always have to try to have 18 to 24 months of cash, mostly during times like this, because we just don't know how long this is going to last, right? And if that means that you can't raise, then you have to make some hard decisions, and you have to figure out how to make your cash last longer, because cash is king in these times. And the other thing I would say is, if you thought at the end of 2019 that your revenues were going to be X, slash them by 50%. And maybe it's not true, and maybe it will be better, but at least look at that and say, if the worst happens, how do I survive? And I think we all have to just be that way right now, because there's going to be another shoe to drop here, and you just have to be prepared for the worst and hope for the best.
Well, that's sound advice, given the uncertainties that we're living under right now. Thank you so much, Pamela, for your time in talking with us, and thank you to JP Morgan for sponsoring the conference.
Thank you so much.